Formula One drivers have seemingly had enough of certain drivers' behaviour on the grid and the inconsistency in the penalties being awarded by the stewards, as they've had a meeting in which 19 out of 20 drivers have agreed that something should change immediately from Brazil. But with Verstappen being the primary talking point about this dangerous manoeuvre in Turn 8 in Mexico, can something change as early as this week? And if so, has Verstappen seen a massive weapon being stripped away from him? One of the most controversial things in the modern Formula One world is the way Verstappen races, because it's at the fine margins of hard wheel-to-wheel racing and dangerous driving. However, while he respected the rules in Austin and used them to his own advantage, in Mexico it was obvious that he has gone over the line in his moves in Turn 4 and Turn 8 against Norris. Here, especially at Turn 8, Verstappen has tried to utilise the rule ahead of the apex that he utilised perfectly in Austin against Sainz and Norris in Turn 1 and Turn 12. But it has gone utterly wrong for him, and he almost ended Norris's race as well, pushing and overtaking him off the track while Leclerc grabbed 2 positions as a gift. This is what the drivers feel that needs to change sooner rather than later. And in the latest meeting they had, it was discussed that it's not just the rules that need to be changed, but the way the drivers are behaving on the track. The ahead of the apex rule allows a lot of grey areas that we've seen not being penalised in 2021, with Brazil being the greatest example of it, as Hamilton said. It's quite interesting people are bringing it to light right now, but back in 2021, it was labelled as hard racing. Nevertheless, when talking about the agreement of the F1 drivers regarding this matter, George Russell has gone on to say, "I think the stewards are totally on board with what needs to change. Our view is, I think the biggest discussion is that they wanted to wait until 2025, so it's something consistent through this year. I would say 19 out of 20 drivers said, well, if it's correct, make the change today. I'm glad to see those incidents were punished, and I suspect moving forward in Brazil, what we saw in Mexico and what we saw in Austin, you won't be able to get away with. 19 out of 20, we're all aligned on where it needs to be." It doesn't take a genius to understand who that one driver would be in terms of opposing the rules of racing. But nevertheless, when the Austin Grand Prix penalty was dished out to Norris and Verstappen was asked about the rulebook's potential change, he said that he will oblige to any change that's being made in it. Whether you like him or not, you cannot deny the fact that he's a driver who understands these rules perfectly and knows how to position his car. But when that doesn't go in his direction, he can become a bit suicidal on the track and just commit to the corner, regardless of whether he's making it with or without his rival. This is why the rules need to change, and on top of that, the inconsistency of the FIA has been quite visible here, which points to another issue: who is actually stewarding the races? In the last 2 events, this has been a very outspoken topic because the steward in Austin, Derek Warwick, has part ownership of Honda and is naturally more motivated to see Verstappen win. Whereas in Mexico, the 2 stewards were Johnny Herbert, the man who entered into a massive feud with Verstappen regarding the swearing incident, and Tim Mayer, the son of the founder of McLaren. It would be hard to say that there wasn't a bit of bias in the decisions of the stewards, although with all due respect, the penalties were deserved. The only discussion is the 10-second penalty for the Turn 4 incident between Verstappen and Norris, but according to the rulebook, it was given 10 seconds because Verstappen not only did not leave space to Norris, but also forced and pushed him off the track. If it was just one of these things, like Russell did in Mexico against Bottas, then it would be the 5-second instead of the preferred 10-second penalty that stands in the rulebook. Be that as it may, Brazil might not see a lot of changes in the behaviour of the drivers, and this is something that Toto Wolff believes in. And when talking about it to a greater extent, the Austrian said, "A driver will always push to the limit, and when the rules or the interpretation of the rules allow a certain way of racing, a driver like Max is always going to exploit it." Now, there's been a new interpretation and execution of those regulations, and I think it will change the way everyone races in the future, and you won't see that anymore. I think the stewards today decided that they don't want to see the drivers pushing each other out the track. That will be the new normality. All drivers will be very aware that if you do that, you risk a 5 or 10-second penalty. I think back in the day, certain stewards had their opinion, and because it wasn't penalised, it basically legitimated it. Fair enough to have a driver who drives within the regulations and utilises all the margins that are given to them by stewards. If you're to ask Red Bull, then the penalties were a bit too harsh, as Marko and Horner both gave their verdict on Verstappen being penalised for the Turn 4 incident, with the team principal of Red Bull bringing telemetry data to suggest that the speed of Norris entering this corner suggested that he was never making the corner in the first place, with 15 km an hour more than his fastest lap. But this is after Norris exited out of a DRS zone, which accounts for around half of that speed being gained, and nevertheless, he was always ahead of Verstappen entering turn 4 from the outside. So according to the current outdated rulebook, the Brit had the right to that corner. What Verstappen did could have easily ended up with Norris damaging his car in a fashion that Perez damaged it in the fight with Lawson, and the championship battle would have taken a great swing towards the Dutchman. Verstappen himself spoke about the penalty he's pointed out to a greater issue that his team has to fix right away, as he said, "You know, honestly, 20 seconds is a lot, but I'm not going to cry about it, and I'm also not going to share my opinion. The biggest problem I have is that today was a bad day in terms of race pace. That was quite clear again, on the mediums and on the hard tyres. I just felt that turn 4 was a bit more of like a question mark. Turn 7, it is what it is, and honestly those two things are also not my problem. The problem is that we're too slow, and that's why I'm being put in those kinds of positions. That was my problem." Be that as it may, Norris is also spoken about the antics of Verstappen and his moves. And according to the championship contender, his rival got exactly what he deserved, because there have been numerous times where he got away with reckless moves that were labelled as hard racing. And from Brazil onwards, it's very unlikely that we're going to see this happening. When talking about it to a greater extent, Norris said, "I go into every race expecting a tough battle with Max. It's clear it doesn't matter if he wins or finishes second. His only job is to beat me in the race. He'll sacrifice himself to do that, like he did today. I want to have those tough battles, like I've seen him have plenty of times, but fair ones. It's always going to be tough with Max. He's never going to make anyone's life easy, especially mine at this point of the year. But I think today was not fair, clean racing. Therefore, I think he got what he had coming to him. Today I feel like I had to avoid collisions, and that's not what you feel like you want to do in a race. He's in a very powerful position in the championship. He's a long way ahead, and he has nothing to lose. People can say it's the other way around, like he's got everything to lose and it's all for me, but it's not the case." On top of the changes that need to be implemented in the rulebook of the FIA, which the drivers are pressurizing to happen from Brazil onwards, there have been some changes in the choice of the stewards. The connections that they have with the parties present on the grid is making it very hard for us to believe that there isn't any bias included in their decision, and even though the penalties of Norris and Verstappen were given by the textbook that the governing body wrote in Austin, it effectively meant that a quality race was taken away from us because of these penalties. As of Brazil, Verstappen could already be on the back foot as he raced with a very old engine in Mexico, meaning that he will likely have to take a 5-place grid penalty for changing the internal parts of the engine in order to avoid a DNF that would deal a crushing blow to his championship hopes. While Brazil is the perfect place to do that, we must add that the close competition between drivers has made it quite hard for Verstappen to overtake easily to the top 3, as Ferrari and McLaren are now holding the title of being the fastest cars on the grid, which effectively means that if all goes well in qualifying, Verstappen might have to deal with 4 opponents and potentially a Mercedes driver on the way of neutralizing the damage of Norris. With all of this in mind, do you think that the rules book needs to change immediately from Brazil? And more importantly, do you think that if Verstappen continues with his reckless driving, he will face the repercussions from the FIA in the same way he did in Mexico? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in the chaos that's currently ravaging Red Bull regarding the second seat next to Verstappen, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.